Well, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be. This is Frederick Winsness with NetHope, and I want to welcome everyone to a No Lost Generation and NetHope webinar. Today we are very proud to mark World Refugee Day and pleased to be together with the No Lost Generation organization to get a broader insight to their work. It's obviously a very appropriate topic for the day that we're marking. We also want to thank Microsoft. We are here at the beautiful Redmond Microsoft campus, and we have a conference room here where we are able to broadcast this webinar. So again, thank you, Microsoft, for all your support. Before we get underway, let me do a few housekeeping rules. Please keep your line muted to reduce the background noise. We want to make this as interactive as possible, so towards the end of the hour today, we will be facilitating a Q&A session. Please use the chat window, so turn on the chat window and line up your questions there, and we will facilitate the Q&A and discussions towards the end. We will also have a little bit of a webinar satisfaction poll towards the end of the hour today, and we'd certainly appreciate people answering those questions. If there is an opportunity towards the end of the hour, we will welcome people to come off mute to ask questions verbally as well. The session is being recorded, and you should be looking for a follow-up email with the recording and the link to all the collateral posted in the NetHope Solutions Center in a day or two. So look for that. So with no further ado, what I'd like to do is to introduce Leila Toplik. Leila is with NetHope, and she leads our No Lost Generation Tech Task Force effort. So Leila.
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. If you could switch to the slide, great. Thank you, Frederick. So I'll take the next couple of minutes to provide context for the conversation this morning and then introduce our speakers. In fact, we thought it would be helpful to begin with an overview of the situation today and then hear about programs, initiatives, and opportunities to collaborate on solutions together. Around the world today, 65.6 million people have been forced from home. Among them are nearly 22.5 million refugees, over half of whom are under the age of 18. And nearly 1 in every 200 children in the world is a child refugee. And refugee children are 5 times more likely to be out of school than non-refugee children. In fact, only 50% of refugee children have access to primary education, compared with a global average of more than 90%. The gap grows as these children become older, with only 22% of refugee adolescents attending secondary school compared to a global average of 84%. And at the higher education level, just 1% of refugees attend university, compared to a global average of 34%. Now, it's important to note that the refugee issue is not a new issue, but the magnitude of Syrian crisis has brought the refugee issue to the forefront. And in fact, we're going to spend the rest of our time together this morning talking about the children and youth affected by the Syrian and Iraqi crisis. Next slide. So today you can expect to hear an overview of the No Lost Generation, or NLG initiative, including NLG's commitment to use technology to help address the needs of refugee children and youth. You'll also hear from refugee youth. As we mark this World Refugee Day, we wanted to call attention to the challenges that the refugee youth face and the opportunities for the broader community to work together to address them. On this call today, we have representatives from the global NGOs, local NGOs, private sector, academic institutions, and host governments. We'll also make sure to leave plenty of time for the Q&A. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce the speakers. We have Katie Barnett from No Lost Generation Initiative. She's a No Lost Generation advisor and UNICEF Regional Office for the Middle East and North Africa. Max Chapley, head of No Lost Generation at World Vision Regional Syria Response. Envira Mendonca, a regional advisor for adolescent development and HIV/AIDS at UNICEF. So I'll hand it over to Katie to provide an overview of the No Lost Generation initiative. Katie.
Katie, you're muted. Let's see if we can unmute you there. Katie, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you. Thanks so much, Leila, for that great introduction. The statistics that Leila shared were particularly hard-hitting, and I'm going to kind of zone in a little bit on the region in particular. But as Leila pointed out, we're really seeing globally an enormous amount of attention being paid to this issue, partly because of the growing volume and complexity of this migration phenomenon that we're seeing. And just to share with you where UNICEF stands, we have seen twice as many child refugees in 2015 as there were 10 years earlier in 2005. And then, we're seeing a lot more children moving on their own and a lot more adolescents and young people moving on their own. So, for example, in 2015 to 16, there were at least 300,000 unaccompanied children recorded who were migrating either as refugees, asylum seekers, or migrants. So it's bigger, and it's the children and young people involved are more vulnerable, and it's more complex. So if you could move along to the next slide for me. No Lost Generation, what is it? Well, it's an initiative that was formed in 2013 by a group of humanitarian actors and humanitarian donors. The US, the UK, and the EU were key in its inception, but all of the major humanitarian agencies you might be aware of, so UNICEF, UNHCR, and then NGOs such as World Vision, Mercy Corps, IRC, Save the Children, all came together and said, we really need to do things better and differently in this crisis because it's huge. The needs that children face are extremely urgent, and we would miss a trick if we didn't strategically invest in some key areas that are not normally seen as life-saving and not normally front-loaded in emergency response. So that led to the creation of 3 pillars of specific attention and a call for investment within No Lost Generation. You can see them on the slide there: education, child protection, and adolescence and youth. And on the slide you can also see the countries which are covered by No Lost Generation. So it's the Syria crisis itself inside Syria, and then the countries surrounding it which are hosting refugees from Syria and are affected. And Iraq is also included in its own right because, of course, there's conflict and a very, very pressing humanitarian situation inside Iraq as well. If you could move along, Frederick. I'll talk a little bit about the situation that we see inside Syria and in the surrounding countries. The statistics on the screen there speak for themselves, so it's very clear why we see an enormous amount of risk for children and young people inside Syria, and also why we see people fleeing. Many people see that as a last resort, but it really relates to a situation that has become extremely difficult to manage inside Syria. I haven't got a slide on Iraq, but Iraq is equally shocking and quite hard to digest some of the numbers. There are 15 million people inside Iraq living in conflict-affected areas. And within that, there are 11 million that are in need of humanitarian assistance, and of that, 5.1 million are children. So that's 5.1 million children inside Iraq who need humanitarian assistance. There are more people in Iraq now that are vulnerable than at any previous time during the conflict. And 3.7 million school-aged children attended school irregularly or not at all in the last year. So you can see that part of the reason why we've developed these 3 pillars is because they come together around the needs of children and young people. So if you're trying to get children out of being recruited by armed forces and armed groups, so if you're trying to get them out of child labour, then you know, you need to invest both in child protection but also in education, and you need to make sure that the positive engagement opportunities are there for adolescents and youth as they go along. If you can move the slide along, Frederick, that would be great. This might seem a bit mysterious. The 3 RP countries, what are they? Well, those are the refugee hosting countries in the region that surround Syria, which I showed on the map just now. And you can see that whilst refugees, in one sense, are in a better place because they've managed to escape the extremely high levels of risk that they were facing in their country of origin, they face a whole new slew of challenges when they arrive in their country of asylum. And over time it gets worse. We've seen a decimation of the livelihoods and savings of families that left Syria and those that left Iraq. And you can see that that then relates to a whole range of growing problems such as child marriage and child labour. And we see patterns of increasing family separation. Sometimes that happens when people are inside Syria, sometimes it happens whilst they're crossing the border. But then afterwards it can also happen where adults and children split up as they just try to find ways of survive, and carers are looking for ways to get their children cared for or get them to have access to education whilst also trying to earn an income themselves. So I won't read out any of these statistics, but of course you'll all have access to the slideshow afterwards. If you could move along, Frederick. I'll just talk a little bit about who we're talking about when we talk about the No Lost Generation Partnership. You can see all of the organizations on the slide there are members of the No Lost Generation initiative. That means that they're doing the work on the ground. This is only a tiny fraction, actually, of all of the different organizations involved in implementing programs in the 6 countries and achieving results for children and youth. As you might imagine, in one particular country, let's take Lebanon as an example, there are many national NGOs and sometimes very, very small groups, local community groups that are really active, and they have the expertise and knowledge for the community that they're working with, and it's really important that we provide them with support. And each of the organizations that you see on this slide is an international organization, but will partner with those local organizations. And of course, faith-based groups and also government, including local government, are key players in the response as well, and they're our allies as we try to ensure that we're providing the best possible response and the best possible future for children and young people affected by the crisis. The next slide shows you the growing number of international donors who have supported No Lost Generation since it started in 2013. You can see, I think there's about 35 countries and multilaterals, such as the European Union, who've provided support. Of course, a lot of support also comes from the general public, who then fund their favorite organization. It could be an international NGO like World Vision or Save the Children. It could be a UN agency, or it could be a local group if they've made that contact. Anyone interested in supporting No Lost Generation can click on to one of the organizations, the partner organizations named on our website, and then you'll be directed to a page which will show you how you can fund. But for these big donors that are institutional, how do they know what to fund and how do we direct them? Well, the next slide shows you the humanitarian plans which are in place. So a humanitarian response has got more organized in recent years, and for each situation, you can see this is divided into three. So one for inside Iraq, one for inside Syria, and one for all of the refugee hosting countries in the region. There is a plan that's agreed across all of the humanitarian agencies that are responding, and all of the donors, like the ones you saw on the previous slide, are committed to providing support to make that response happen as it is outlined in the humanitarian plan. So it's no longer a sort of ad hoc charity-driven enterprise. It's much more of a well thought through, evidence-based response that is agreed across the board, and then very transparently available. And for bigger institutional donors interested in funding the response, these are key documents and reference points. And it's an important point to make because in setting up an initiative like No Lost Generation, we need to be as clear and as light as possible. There's a lot of process involved in the humanitarian response, and we don't want to add to it. So we're not having a separate appeal. You'll find all of the child protection, education, adolescent and youth programs that we are advocating for included in these humanitarian plans. I'll just conclude very briefly with a couple of slides on so how has it been different having this particular initiative of No Lost Generation in this response. We could have just gone ahead with our business as usual as humanitarians, but we decided to come together across 3 different sectors of 6 different countries. So how did it change things? Well, you can see there the key points that where No Lost Generation adds value. We've seen a pattern in this response where the sectors which normally are very underfunded, and that includes child protection and education, are in much better health in terms of funding in this response. So we hope that that's partly as a result of our efforts under No Lost Generation. It also has really provided us with a way to build a strong coalition of actors, all based in the region, advocating for the priorities that are really going to make or break the future for children and youth. We have a joint commitment also for making sure that we amplify and convey faithfully the voices of children and youth, and that's part of what we're doing today. I'd like to also say that No Lost Generation has now provided us a way to come together as humanitarians and have a really intelligent, exciting conversation with the private sector and the tech sector in particular, and that's thanks to NetHope and their convening power and their insights into the private sector and tech community. This, if we go to the final slide, this relationship with NetHope came about quite recently, so earlier on this year. Just one example of a way that No Lost Generation has brought together the community is an EdTech summit that we held. It was championed and led by World Vision, but it was open to all of the No Lost Generation partners, and we were kind of commonly convened to really think through how we can better reach children. In that case, we were zeroing in on education and working with the tech community to understand what their contribution could be in that area. So we were delighted to be able to start that conversation. And I think today is an example of how we want to explore somewhere new and see how, together with partners in the private sector and the tech community, we can really listen properly to the priorities of young people, and we can do our best to respond. And I feel that there's loads of potential there that that we just have to uncover and then exploit. So with that, I'm going to hand back, and I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end of the session.
Great, thank you very much, Katie. And actually, we have Mark from World Vision to speak to a little bit further to NLG's commitment to use technology in order to address the needs of refugee children and youth. Mark.
Good evening, good morning, everybody. Yeah, just very brief presentation from me, picking up where Katie left off. As Katie mentioned, World Vision are a co-lead on the No Lost Generation initiative, and as such, took the lead on organising No Lost Generation EdTech Summit here in Amman on the 1st and 2nd of March. So I'm just going to take you through very briefly a little bit of overview of the summit and some of the outcomes and some plans going forward for the relationship between No Lost Generation and technology, not just education technology, but technology across the three pillars of No Lost Generation: youth, child protection, and education. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So the summit was held in Amman on the 1st and 2nd of March this year, and it's the first of its kind in Jordan. Over 200 EdTech innovators, providers, investors, and actors from public, private, and non-profit sectors in the region and globally came together with the intention of networking and collaboration, and to actually co-design some interventions and innovations to support children and youth affected by the Syrian crisis. One of the key aims, as mentioned there, was to collaborate and to form partnerships to look at synergies and to avoid duplication. And another one of the aims was to look at an evidence base behind the number of technological innovations which are already on the market or coming onto the market, as it were. In the first element, the collaboration and the cooperation and partnership, the event was incredibly successful, very strong feedback on that. In terms of evidence building, there's still some way to go, and that's globally, and that's in some ways that's a bit of a call to arms for people listening, and to the tech sector in particular. How can we get better at developing an evidence base behind innovations to show their working and show their impact on children? So we were very grateful to run the event with support both from World Vision, Microsoft, and NetHope, and then the other sponsors I mentioned here were also contributing in kind and to some of the startup funds that were offered at the event. So we move to the next slide, I can take you through that. So there are over 200 attendees from across the EdTech sector, right across the spectrum of organizations, from NGOs to major tech companies. Representation from Microsoft, Facebook, Google, Cisco, the Australian Embassy, Swedish Embassy, UNICEF, UNHCR, other UN bodies, Save the Children IRC, other major NGOs, small and medium enterprises, local startups, and local tech firms. The event was originally planned for 100 people, but we had to rapidly scale it up due to the demand at the time. One of the key strengths of the event was us being able to provide a marketplace where people could display their innovations and talk people through them and actually have demonstrations in person. So we had over 33 exhibitors, again drawn from corporates, startups, NGOs, UN agencies, and they were drawn from across the world. One of the most exciting components of the event was that we were able to draw an interest from donors to sponsor some proposals that actually developed at the event. So participants were encouraged to come together and develop plans that lined up with the call for proposals from the various different donors that very generously committed funds to the event. So the All Children Reading Challenge, which is partnership between the American government, the Australian government, and World Vision, sponsored two $50,000 awards. The Malala Fund offered a $50,000 award. World Reader also $50,000. Startup Boat offered 35,000 euros for 25,000 euros for and the opportunity to enter into a startup incubator. And Zain, the telecommunications company, supported Jordan-only projects with up to $10,000 in cash and professional business mentoring. So we very much took the kind of startup, hackathon, incubator mentality and applied that to the humanitarian sector, and it's received very well. The particular opportunities were offered in funding for refugee youth and girls, for science, technology, engineering, maths, stories and illustrations, projects that would encourage parent and child reading and engagement in child's education, and Zain is sponsoring the Jordan-based projects as well. The donors selected 13 finalists, and from those they've now narrowed that down to the particular finalists that they want to work with. And negotiations are ongoing with that, and we hope to announce very soon who was successful in winning the awards and how they're taking their projects forward. All of the information from the summit is now on the website, nlgedtech.com. So all the presentations that took place and all the videos, materials, and the follow-up on the seed funding is all online on the website now. So feel free to have a look at that and let us know if you have any ongoing questions. I think some of the key outcomes, as well as the startups, the funding, with the partnerships that were formed and the establishment of the NLG Tech Task Force run by NetHope, which is convening the event today, and later we'll talk a bit more about later. So we're very excited that that's moved forward. If we go to the next slide, please. So one of the clear asks that going into the event and coming out of it was that we are able to hold a follow-up event in Jordan early next year. So that's already started on the planning process. And during the discussions, we had some clear feedback from private sector companies in the US that they would love to be involved and are very interested in the Knowledge Generation Initiative and how their technology and ideas can contribute to the aims and objectives, but were unable to make the journey to Jordan. So in response to that, we are hoping to run an event in September in Silicon Valley, face-to-face, bringing some of the presenters and presentations from Jordan, as well as some particular calls to action we want to flag with the companies. NetHope have very kindly set up a registration form, so if they're private sector companies online who are interested in the event, want to get involved, you can pre-register now at the link that Leila's put up in the chat box. We will get back to you with more information as we get nearer to the time. But we're very actively looking for partners and people who are keen to engage and have some suggestions, resources, and ideas they can bring to the table. So that's the summary from me. You can see the website address there, nlgedtech.com, but we'll put it in the chat box as well. Also on the website is the summary of the feedback from participants, which was overwhelmingly positive. We put some of it here. The room for expression and creativity, the opportunities for collaboration, the sharing of ideas, and the forming of partnerships. So, very pleased with that. We hope to be able to bring the successes of that and the collaborative endeavors to Silicon Valley later this year, and look forward to meeting some of you face-to-face there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, very much for this overview of the NLG's commitment to both cross-sector collaboration and also using technology to support refugee children and youth. I'll speak just briefly about the NLG Tech Task Force for those of you who are not familiar with this collaboration between NetHope and NLG with the support from Microsoft. If you click to the next slide, Frederick, the task force is really focused on connecting private sector resources and expertise, including technology, with the needs of refugee children and youth. We do that by facilitating cross-sector information sharing, and we're hosting regular webinars where we have tech companies or just more broadly private sector companies talk about the technology solutions that are being embedded together with in a partnership with NGOs, talk about the solutions that are being embedded in refugee education, skills training, and employment programs. And we're also focusing on initiating project-based collaborations with NGOs and private sector companies like Microsoft, HP, and Coursera. Membership, as you can see, is open to global and local NGOs, private sector companies, academic institutions, and host governments. If you'd like to be informed and also participate in NLG Tech Task Force, please sign up on the website and you will receive more information about the upcoming webinars, convenings, and also resources that are available to you. And now I'm thrilled to have actually Vera introduce the feature topic of this webinar and the opportunity for all of us to work together to support refugee youth. Vera, over to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity. One of the reasons why it's me talking as opposed to the young people directly talking to everybody is it's around 6:30 in the evening now. Most of the young people and the others here are getting ready to break the fast. So that is the reason why for today we have recorded conversations with young people that you're going to get to listen to. What we have an opportunity through this webinar is to hear the voices of some groups of young people. These represent just few fractions of young people, but they, as per the No Loss Generation and the Pillar 3, are focusing on creating evidence of what are the key issues for young people. So what you get to hear is basically young people themselves who have conducted research, who have worked with other young people to identify issues of concern for them. Could we go to the next slide, please? So you would get to listen to 3 speakers today. Batul Zahra, who is a Syrian refugee. She's living in Jordan. She's from Homs. Batul herself was involved in the participatory action research, the research where I mentioned where young people themselves are engaged in conducting focus group discussions and conducting use of simple tools to actually understand what are the key issues of concern. So she's going to talk to you about some of the findings that her research identified. On the second side, you'll see Yasmin Asi and George Cowrie. They represent a group of young people from inside Syria. They are displaced. They have moved from different parts. They are now in Damascus. These young people are going to show you the positive attitudes of young people despite all the circumstances and the challenges that face, that given little opportunities, and this is something you see across the board, given even limited opportunities, these young people really showcase and do excellent things. So these are young entrepreneurs. They have been selected through a process. They've got some seed funding, and they're going to talk a little bit about the programs that they're doing. So without taking too much time, I'm going to ask Frederick to put on the videos. Over to you, Frederick.
جاكم العاصي من مدينة دير الزور شرق سوريا. جيت على دمشق من بداية الأحداث اللي صارت عنا والحرب بسوريا. جيت على منطقة صحنايا في دمشق، انضميت لإحدى الدورات التدريبية التابعة لجمعية دور الإغاثة والتنمية. هي الدورة التدريبية تحكي عن إنه في واحد بيشتغل على نقاط الضعف والقوة عنده على القيادة المجتمعية والتطوع. حكوا لنا إنه في مشروع بريدجز التابع للمنظمة الأوروبية للتعاون والتنمية ممكن تدعم هاي المشاريع بسهولة. أنا في بداية نزوحي من منطقة لمنطقة كنت بشوف كثير مشاكل عند الناس بسبب الحرب، وأنا كنت كثير بساعدها بحس إنه أنا ما فيني أعيش إذا ما بساعد الناس، بحب السلام عندي والسلام بين الناس. يعني هذا الشيء ممكن يخدع تأثيرات الحرب السلبية اللي صارت عندنا. انضميت لمشروع بريدجز بالمعهد الأوروبي، خضعت لدورة تدريبية. الدورة التدريبية عبارة عن 3 مراحل مع مدربين مختلفين. كنت بتعلم عن الريادة المجتمعية ورياديين الأعمال، كيف هن عندهم أفكار وكيف الواحد بيقدر بيخلق فكرة يحل مشكلة بتساعد الناس، وتكون هاي الفكرة بالفعل إنه حتساعدهم ترفع من المستوى المعيشة عندهم، ويعني تحس إنه الحل ممكن إنه بدون هاي تأثيراتها هذا الشيء اللي أنت عم تساعد فيه الناس. أنا مشروعي هو هوب كومباس بوصلة أمل، بيحكي عن تعليم الطلاب اللي مهجرين واللي هن متواجدين اصلا في مراكز الايواء. انا اتنزحت لهم في مقايسه جامعتي، تركت جامعه شي سنتين، فوقت رجعت على دراستي بدمشق حسيت انه انا عندي صعوبات اني بتذكر معلوماتي، فما بالك بالاطفال اللي هن اصلا حينشئوا جيل سوريا والمستقبل. فوقتها انضميت حكيت عن مشروعي. يعني كثير المدربين واللي موجودين بالاي اي سي دي كثير حبوا الفكره وكثير دعموني، لهالسبب قدمت. وإذ صار يوم الإعلان نتائج يعني أول شيء قدمنا للجلسة الحكام، وهنا كانوا يعني كثير متحمسين للفكرة وانبسطوا. أنا كثير يعني حسيت وأنا كنت مآمنة إنه يعني ممكن إنه ينبع في المجتمع، مع إنه هو بسيط بس بيحل مشكلة كثير كبيرة. وقتها أعلن النتائج وكانت كثير شيء حلو إنه أنا يعني للجلس ومع دعم الآي إي سي. تمام. كان في مشكلة إنه وقت أنا أخذت التمويل اشتريت الموارد، رحت على كثير مراكز إيواء، شفت الناس مراكز الإيواء بعيدة وما دعم عندي بالمواصلات والأمن، فحبيت بعمل شيء اسمه فريق تعليمي جوا بيروح على أكثر من منطقة وبيعلم الأطفال هناك. وقتها رحت حكيت المشكلة إنه ما في عندي مثل سنتر أو مكتب لجمعية والإغاثة والتنمية، إن كثير انبسطوا وقالوا إنه حيدعموني يعطوني الفترة الأولى قاعة مجهزة إنه بدرس فيها إنه الطلاب. طبعا كثير في ناس هناك داعميني، جمعت فريق حاليا وحنبلش نشتغل وندرس هدول الأطفال، حننتشر يعني بكل المناطق القريبة. إذا فيكم بتشوفوا تتابعوا عن مشروعي بتشوفوا موقع جمعية الإغاثة والتنمية، تشوفوا هذا الموقع وتتابعوا كيف أنا عم أشتغل مشروع، تشوفوا تسمعوا قصص نجاحي وكيف أنا عم أثر بالناس. بدي أشكر الآي إي سي دي والمدربين وبشكر جمعية الإغاثة والتنمية، وبتمنى إنه تسمع كل المنظمات اللي تدعم الطفل وتدعم التعليم وتدعمني لمشروعي مشان أنا بنتشر على كل العالم وبساعد كل الأطفال وبنشر التعليم بكل مكان بحل السلام. شكرا كثير.
And it's while we're switching from one video to the next, it's worth mentioning that these videos are actually created and produced by these young children themselves. So here's the second video.
مرحبا، اسمي بتوزة من سوريا، عمري 21 سنة. سنة أولى بكلية الحقوق، متطوعة بمركز الأميرة وأسمع متطوعة بيونيسف وأدخل الاستشارية بمكتب الأردن الأمريكي. هلا بالنسبة لمشكلة التوظيف هي مشكلة كثير عويصة، يعني إذا بالنسبة للأردنيين فعليا حسب سنوات التوظيف، فكيف بالنسبة للاجئين اللي ما بيحملوا الجنسية الأردنية؟ وهون نحكي قدام مشكلة كثير كبيرة أمام انضمام اللاجئ في سوق العمل سواء بالقطاع الخاص والقطاع العام. وإذا اللاجئ ما قدر يشتغل كيف يقدر يعيش حياة كريمة؟ أما بالنسبة للحلول هلا مبدئيا تقام برامج تدريبية مثل اللي طرحت سابقا من زملاء بالتعاون مع اليونيسف في عدة مجالات. ثانيا تأمين فرص عمل من خلال إقامة مشاريع خاصة من قبل المؤسسات غير الربحية والشركات الخاصة باللاجئين فقط، تقدر توفر لهم فرص عمل يشتغلوا من خلالها. أما بالنسبة لذوي الكفاءات يعني اللاجئين اللي عم يدرسوا بالجامعات الأردنية أو بالنسبة للمتخرجين وقاعدين حالهم، وأنا أكبر مثال بدرسوا بحقوق وأتخرج محامين، بس فعليا أنا ما رح أقدر أشتغل وما رح أقدر أدخل في سوق العمل لأنه لا أحمل الجنسية الأردنية. فهذا الشيء خلانا نفكر أنا وكثير من الشباب اللاجئين إنه نهاجر لدول برا حتى نقدر نتعلم وننجح ونشتغل. حتى نقدر نأمن مستقبلنا، يعني إذا ما أمنا مستقبلنا واشتغلنا ونجحنا رح يضيع، رح يكون كثير ممتع. وأنا عن جد حلمي إني قادر أعيش حياة جديدة مستحقة. أما بالنسبة للتكنولوجيا فهي لها عامل كثير أكثر بالموضوع، من خلال مواقع السوشيال ميديا تقدر تطرح الفرص العمل المتواصلة من خلالها، فبيعرفوا اللاجئين بأي فرصة عمل متوفرة. كمان من خلال إقامة موقع تأمين فرصة عمل للاجئ يقدروا من خلال اللاجئين اللي يشاركوا فيه يسجلوا فيه ويصير عندهم خبر بأي فرصة متاحة لهم.
And we're going to go to the third video. I'm going to mute myself first.
Okay, so Vera, we'll go back to your slides now to really just help put this together for the participants on the webinar in an overview of the different both challenges and needs that the refugee youth have, and then the opportunities for the private sector and for the humanitarian sector to work together to support the youth.
Well, thank you. What we saw here is actually, and as Frederick said, these are products and videos made by the young people themselves. These young people come from very vulnerable situations. Some of them have been working long hours for just 6 JDs. Some of them, which is around $12 for the whole day, you know, or less. Some of them work for are being displaced in many situations. Despite these, when opportunities are provided, these young people come up with amazing ideas and access any of the opportunities they get. What I'm going to give in the next slide is an overview of some of the key issues that come through for the research that is done across the region, whether it is inside Iraq, inside Syria, for the young people who are refugees in the different communities. What comes through very clearly is that all of them have very similar common aspirations. And what varies is based on the age, the sex, if they're a boy or a girl, or also on their legal status. So the most marginalized within a community, let's say Jordan, the children living with disabilities or others have very similar and common aspirations. All of them want to complete their education, whether it's formal or non-formal. They all want to gain decent employment, and I think that is one of the driving things. They just want to have employment, to become independent adults, support their families. And what cuts across every single group of young people when we talk to within this, refugees and the most vulnerable host community youth, is that they want to live in peaceful and stable communities. Areas where young people's dreams are respected and we themselves are respected. What are some of the key barriers these young people face as they are trying to access just these basic common aspirations? Something that cuts across everywhere is the social and economic exclusion. What we see, and this is research generated, as I said, by the young people, those who have been out of school for 6+ years because of the conflict, what comes through very clearly is both the financial insecurity, the poverty they face, actually underpins and puts them in very, very difficult situation. They face significant discrimination based on just their sex, nationality, on the location of where they are, and on their legal status. Some of the key challenges beyond social and economic exclusion, they feel are where they have such minimal support from school to work. And of course, within the school setting, they talk about the fact that they have very poor access to very poor quality education, and if they are out of school, very, very limited opportunities for them to get accredited non-formal education, which will then allow them to actually make that jump, even though they're working children, even if they are married, young girls who have had to leave school, that they can make that jump into decent employment. One of the things, as I talked about earlier also, the lack of certification, the documentation. You had Batul who talked about the fact that she's studying to be a lawyer, but she knows she cannot be a lawyer because she's in Jordan. Her very legal status limits the opportunities she has. And where the young people, you have young graduates, refugee youth, who are now in other countries who know they don't have the networks. And because of that, a very simple statement that comes from the young people, they're stealing our future. So the nepotism and favoritism that they see is really impacting the access to the limited jobs that are there in our region. And for girls in our region, and especially for refugee girls as well as the host community girls, what comes through is either when they're dropping out of school, the access to education and the access to jobs in a non-discriminatory environment is almost minimal. For a girl to work in a male-dominated environment or having access to teleworking is absolutely limited. So these, as across the board, you see that the most marginalized groups in our region, in Syria, inside Iraq, within the refugee hosting countries, are refugee youth, girls, working children, and young people with disabilities. And some of the young people do talk about support factors, and family and friends are areas where they talk about support. One of the things which we see very often is young people being forced into isolation. The very fact that they're away from families, broken families across the board, pushes young people into very difficult situations. In areas in Lebanon, we see very harsh realities for refugee youth. Similarly, inside Syria, where there is danger of young people getting recruited or there is danger of being conscripted. They also talk about financial support, and they talk about that this has significant focus. So even if it's scholarship, even if it is cash transfers, that level of financial support makes a huge difference for young people. Their engagement in programming and advocacy through partners, through other means, has made huge influence for the young people. And what comes through across the board, and I think is very stark and very, for me, very humbling, is that it amazes me at how positive the young people are and how supportive they are for any opportunity they get. So that level, that resilience, that nothing is impossible to achieve. You heard one of the young persons him talking about it specifically. So that they feel that if given just a little bit of opportunity, they can access their own rights. And can I have the next slide, please? So some of the summary in terms of what are the key asks or how we can, as a group, support refugee youth, as donors, as partners, as programmers. If we can create space that young people can partner with us, even if it is small funding that we give, even if it is projects that we implemented, we can make sure that young people partner at all stages of programming. All of us were at the table if we can create that space, because when we did the mapping analysis for the adolescents and youth program, we found that less than 20% of the programs provide that space. Very few programs provide that space for young people to sit at the table, influence. Yes, it means harder work to get the most vulnerable young people. When we conducted the research and supported the young people to conduct the research, those who couldn't read or write needed intensive support. We needed to give them digital technologies where they could do audio recordings. How do they do data analysis? But if we engage these young people, we can actually break that vicious cycle of poverty. So a clear ask and is partner with young people at all stages of programming. Let us see how we can expand financial support. As I said, that is a cross-cutting issue, and it's at the crux of the impact that we see with refugee youth and with the most vulnerable young people. Open up pathways for inclusion. You as group of amazing technological partners, young people are looking at opportunities of getting accredited education across boundaries, and that can open up different job opportunities. They may not be able to work within the geographical boundaries they're in, but maybe through innovation they can work across. A clear thing that comes, and as I said, everybody wants young people with experience, and there are very limited opportunities to gain that experience. Either it is through internships, volunteering, apprenticeship. How can we expand those opportunities so that they can gain practical experience? For girls especially, creating alternative career opportunities. And this is very important because there are such limited opportunities which, in keeping with the social norms, in keeping with the environment within this space. Expand access to quality education opportunities. And this, as I mentioned, is a need that comes through, that young people need quality education which addresses and provides them that level of education that they can get the jobs, not education that's not going to keep them qualified or be qualified to access decent jobs. Another area where they have requested support, and this comes especially from these young entrepreneurs and the young people who are within these boundaries, is to seek technical support, mentorship, and guidance. Very often they come up with blocks because they don't have the traditional job opportunities. They don't have access to the traditional education opportunities. If through this NetHope Task Force, through others, we can create mentorship where colleagues can volunteer time, create networks so that young people can engage with other young people, understand and learn from them, and see how together they can address some of the bottlenecks they face, and expand and support innovative solutions by and for young people. Create space so that young people can learn about social and business entrepreneurship elsewhere, so they can look and expand those similar ones within the countries they're in currently. So these are some of the asks that have come from the young people themselves. Hello. I have the opportunity to present it on behalf of the young people, but I'm hoping that in future instances you will have the opportunity to hear from them yourself. Over.
Thank you very much, Vera. This was incredibly insightful. And for those of you who are wondering if we're going to be sharing the slides and the videos, we absolutely will. And through the NLG Tech Task Force, as Vera mentioned, and then also through the private sector event that we're planning in Silicon Valley in September, we actually plan to take some of these opportunities and asks and collaborate with the private sector companies on actually delivering on some of these ideas that the young people have asked for. And I'll just say from personal experience, having been a refugee myself and also a former refugee school teacher, I know what it means like to actually have access to quality education and employment opportunities, and how far you can go if you have access to those couple of things that we tend to actually take for granted. So one of the things that we've just realized, we have only 4 minutes for the Q&A, so we'll keep this slide in the background. In terms of just knowing how you can join us in many different ways, from information sharing to actually participating and working with us hands-on to deliver on the needs of refugee children and youth, and then hand it over to Frederick to moderate the Q&A.
Well, thank you very much, Leila. And all the links that you see there on that slide is in the chat window as well, so you can scroll back up and access those directly. We'll also include that on the web posting as well as the follow-up email. So there were a couple of questions that came in early on, and when I was curious myself relative to where does the child education take place in these countries? Is it in the refugee camps only, or is it in established schools? This may be a question for Katie.
Thank you. The majority of refugees in this region are not in camps, so it's really a very small proportion of refugees and internally displaced people, so those displaced but not having crossed the border, that are in camps. The majority of children accessing education is through their local school or the school in the place where they've ended up. There are also supplementary education solutions being provided in the form of informal schooling and some remote schooling, but that's really not the majority. It's really a kind of as I say, it's a supplementary way of reaching those children. And the ideal is that eventually they are all embraced by the national education system where they are and have, all the support they need in terms of accessing in the right language, or, language support so they can access in the local language, because, we've got Kurdish, Arabic, Turkish, French in Lebanon going on. So it can be difficult for Syrian children to access for those reasons, but also because of the social cohesion, making sure that they're not bullied in school, that there's not discrimination against refugees in school, and also that the national school system has got the capacity, the classrooms, the teachers, the equipment, the time to reach all of those children. We do have an education expert on the line. I suddenly realized that I shouldn't be talking about this. It should be my colleague from World Vision, Mark Chappell. So if there's more to add, he should do so.
Yeah, Mark, feel free to jump in. I'm going to flip over to the webinar satisfaction poll. This is something people can fill in right there on the screen. We'll also put that in the chat window. But Mark, if you have any thoughts on this, please jump in.
Just very quickly, Katie gave a great answer there. The camps are minimal, and where they are generally running the national curriculum. The host governments deserve recognition for their ability and willingness to absorb huge numbers of refugee children into the formal education system. Not to say there are no challenges with that in terms of access and quality and cost and all the associated barriers, but nevertheless it's a fantastic endeavor by the host governments to do so. NGOs are also offering non-formal and informal education, as well as catch-up classes and remedial classes to support children to get into and stay in formal education. And then inside Syria itself, again, a mixture of establishing of non-formal centres and support to some of the formal schools there that are still functioning. So there's no hard and fast rule of how and where refugee and displaced children are learning. It's a bit of a mix, but one thing we see across the region is that huge willingness to learn and the importance placed on education for children and young people. So we're very much working closely with governments, with the UN and with local partners inside Syria too, to try and meet this demand and provide education stability for children and young people.
Thank you very much, Mark. We are now past the top of the hour, and we're going to close this out. I want to thank Leila. I want to thank Katie and Vera and Mark for incredible, valuable information. Thank you to the young children, not children, the young people that produce those videos. They're fantastic and provides a slight sliver of hope in a situation that very, very few of us can even imagine living in. So I hope this has been useful for everyone that's attending. I thank you for the questions that came in, and should there be questions that are needed to be answered further, we'll follow up with that in written format and post that to the NetHope Solutions Center. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and we will be in touch soon. Take care. Bye-bye.